The audience erupted into applause as the lead ballerina floated across the stage like a feather in the wind. But behind the spotlight lay a journey riddled with cruel whispers, exclusion, and relentless doubt. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in their eyes. Yet here she was, defying the odds, proving to the world that talent sees no color. It all started in a small living room in Ava's home, which was far from luxurious, but it held something magical. Against one wall stood a second-hand mirror, cracked at the edges but large enough for Ava to see her dreams reflected back at her. She'd spend hours in front of it, twirling and leaping with a grace that seemed to come from another world. Her movements were clumsy at first, but she didn't care. In her mind, she was already a star. Ava had fallen in love with ballet by accident. One evening, as she flipped through the 3 channels their old TV could pick up, a performance caught her eye. On screen, a ballerina in a pristine white tutu glided effortlessly across the stage, her movements delicate yet powerful. Ava was mesmerized, but what struck her most wasn't the beauty of the dance, it was the ballerina's skin, as pale as the moonlight. "Why don't they look like me?" Ava had asked her mother that night, her small voice heavy with curiosity. Her mother, Marlene, had knelt down, taking Ava's hands in hers. "Because some people don't believe we belong there," she said softly. "But if you want to be up there, baby, you can be. You just have to want it bad enough." From that day on, Ava was unstoppable. Every spare moment was spent practicing, pirouettes in the kitchen, plies in the yard, arabesques between the narrow hallways of their apartment. Her younger brother, Jamal, teased her mercilessly, but Ava didn't care. She could feel it deep in her bones. Ballet wasn't just a hobby. It was her calling. When Ava turned 10, her mother surprised her with a gift that must have taken months of saving, a spot in the community ballet class. The dance studio wasn't much, just a rented room in the local rec center with scuffed floors and mismatched mirrors. But to Ava, it felt like the grandest stage. Her first class was a mixture of excitement and terror. Most of the other girls were white, with sleek buns and brand new leotards. Ava, in her thrift store outfit and homemade ballet slippers, felt their eyes on her as she walked in. The whispers started almost immediately. "Does she even know how to dance?" One girl said, loud enough for Ava to hear, "She doesn't look like a ballerina." Another added, giggling. Ava's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. She refused to let them see her falter. The instructor, Miss Diane, was polite but distant. "Welcome, Ava," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Let's see what you can do." When it was Ava's turn to perform a simple sequence of steps, her nerves nearly got the better of her. Her heart pounded as she stood in the center of the room, all eyes on her. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the music guide her. Her movements weren't perfect, but there was something raw and genuine about the way she danced. For a moment, the whispers stopped, and the room fell silent. By the end of class, Ava overheard Miss Diane speaking to another instructor. "She has potential, but she doesn't have the right look. Ballet is about tradition, after all." Ava pretended not to hear, but the words cut deep. That night, as she practiced in front of her cracked mirror, tears threatened to spill over. But she remembered her mother's words. If you want it bad enough, she wanted it more than anything, and she was willing to fight for it. Ava's love for ballet grew stronger with every class, but so did the challenges she faced. Each week, she arrived early, her heart bursting with hope, only to leave the studio with a heavy weight pressing down on her. The whispers had turned into stares, the stares into snickers, and the snickers into outright comments. One afternoon, as Ava tied the ribbons on her worn ballet slippers, a girl named Charlotte, who always seemed to be the leader of the group, walked up with a smirk. "Are those even real ballet shoes?" Charlotte asked, pointing at Ava's slippers. "They're real enough for me to dance in," Ava said, her voice steady. "Well, good luck," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're going to need it." Ava bit her tongue and turned away, focusing on the mirror. She couldn't let them break her spirit. Miss Diane, the instructor, wasn't much better. Though she never said anything outright, her actions spoke volumes. During group routines, Ava was always placed in the back row, hidden from view. Corrections that other girls received were never offered to Ava. It was as if she was invisible, but Ava wasn't invisible to everyone. An older janitor, Mr. Pete, often watched from the corner as he mopped the studio floors. One day, as Ava stayed late to practice, Mr. Pete leaned on his mop and said, "You've got fire in you, kid. Don't let them snuff it out." His words became a mantra for Ava. Every time she felt small, every time she wanted to quit, she repeated those words to herself, "You've got fire in you." Still, the hurdles kept coming. One day, Miss Diane announced that the studio would be holding auditions for the annual showcase, a big event attended by talent scouts and local dignitaries. The excitement in the room was electric. This was the chance every girl had been waiting for. Ava practiced non-stop, perfecting every leap and turn. She stayed late every night, working on her routine in the dim light of the studio. Even when her feet ached and her muscles burned, she kept going. The day of the audition arrived, and Ava stepped onto the stage with her heart in her throat. The music began, and she poured everything she had into her performance. For those few minutes, she wasn't just a girl from a poor neighborhood, she was a star. When she finished, the room was silent. Ava's heart soared. Had she done it? But as the results were posted, her name wasn't there. Instead, girls who had stumbled during their performances were listed. Charlotte, who had barely practiced, was given the lead role. Ava felt her chest tighten as the other girls celebrated. She caught a glimpse of Miss Diane speaking with another instructor. "She danced well, but she just doesn't fit the part," Miss Diane said, her voice low but clear enough for Ava to hear. That night, Ava sat in her room, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. For the first time, doubt crept into her heart. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong. But then she thought of her mother, who had worked overtime to pay for her classes. She thought of Mr. Pete's words, of the fire she felt every time she danced. "No," Ava whispered to herself, her jaw tightening. "They don't get to decide what I can or can't do." She wiped her tears, stood up, and began practicing her routine again. Ava wasn't just going to prove them wrong. She was going to show them what they'd been too blind to see. By the time Ava turned 16, her relentless dedication finally earned her a spot in an elite ballet company. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to perform on bigger stages and prove her worth. But stepping into that world felt like entering a battlefield. The company was everything Ava had dreamed of: towering ceilings, polished studios, and dancers so skilled they seemed to defy gravity. Yet, beneath the glamour lay an undercurrent of unspoken rules. Ava quickly realized that the barriers she thought she had left behind were still there, only more subtle and insidious. During her first rehearsal, Ava's heart raced with excitement. She was ready to give it her all. But as the company director, Madame Laurent, called out positions, Ava noticed a pattern. "Charlotte, front and center," Madame Laurent announced, her voice sharp and decisive. "Ava, back row, far left." Ava felt her stomach drop. The back row was practically invisible to the audience. She couldn't help but notice that the same girls who had mocked her in the past were now being handed the spotlight. "Don't take it personally," a fellow dancer whispered during a break. "Madame Laurent has a certain vision for what the lead roles should look like." Ava didn't need to ask what that meant. She'd heard it all before. The isolation wasn't just professional, it was personal too. The other dancers formed tight-knit cliques, whispering and laughing in corners. Ava, with her darker skin and thrifted dancewear, was an outsider. Even Olivia, one of the more seasoned dancers, seemed to take pleasure in making Ava's life difficult. One afternoon, as Ava prepared for rehearsal, she discovered her costume had been tampered with. The delicate straps were torn, rendering it unwearable. Ava knew who was responsible. Olivia's smug smile from across the room was proof enough. "Problem, Ava?" Olivia asked, feigning innocence. Ava bit her lip, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Despite the sabotage, Ava improvised with her practice clothes and still delivered a flawless rehearsal. But the frustration was building inside her. She had worked so hard to get here, only to face the same dismissive attitudes and petty games. The final straw came during casting for the company's upcoming production. It was a coveted role, and Ava had poured her soul into the audition. When the results were announced, she held her breath. the lead role will go to Charlotte, Madame Laurent declared. Ava's chest tightened. She glanced at Charlotte, who had fumbled during the audition. It didn't make sense, Madame Laurent continued. Ava, you'll be understudy. Your talent is undeniable, but the lead role requires a certain aesthetic. The word hit Ava like a slap. Aesthetic. It was just another way of saying she didn't fit their mold. That evening, Ava sat alone in the studio long after everyone had left. Tears streamed down her face as she replayed the day's events. She wanted to scream, to quit, to leave it all behind. But as she stared at her reflection in the studio's mirror, a memory resurfaced, her mother's voice, telling her to want it bad enough. You've got fire in you, she whispered, echoing Mr. Pete's words. The fire hadn't gone out, not yet. With renewed determination, Ava decided she wouldn't wait for someone to give her a chance. She'd create her own. There was an international ballet competition in 3 months, one that could catapult her into the spotlight on her own terms. From that moment on, Ava doubled down. She stayed late, practicing until her muscles screamed. She studied videos of legendary performances, perfecting every move. The whispers, the sabotage, the unfairness, they all became fuel for her fire. Ava wasn't just dancing for herself anymore. She was dancing for every girl who had been told she didn't belong. The day of the international ballet competition drew closer, and Ava's life became a blur of training, exhaustion, and self-doubt. She pushed herself harder than ever before, often skipping meals and sleeping just a few hours a night. Every step, every spin, and every leap was fueled by a mix of determination and desperation, but her relentless pace began to take a toll. One evening, as Ava practiced late in the studio, her body gave out mid-leap. She crumpled to the floor, clutching her ankle in pain. The sharp jolt left her gasping, tears of frustration mixing with the sweat on her face. No, no, no. She whispered fiercely, trying to stand. Her ankle throbbed, refusing to bear her weight. Panic set in. The competition was just 2 weeks away. This wasn't supposed to happen, not now. She hobbled to a bench, her mind racing. All she could think about was the sacrifice her mother had made, the hours she'd spent fighting against a world that didn't believe in her. I can't fail. Not after everything. The next day, Ava reluctantly visited a physical therapist. The verdict was grim, a sprained ankle. She needed rest, but rest wasn't an option. Ava left the clinic with her heart sinking. Back at the studio, she tried to hide her limp from the others, but it didn't go unnoticed. Olivia, always eager to pounce, smirked as she passed by. Tough break, Ava, Olivia said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Guess some people just aren't cut out for this. Ava clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Watch me, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The next few days were a test of her resilience. She adjusted her routine, focusing on upper body strength and flexibility while her ankle healed. She practiced through the pain, icing her injury between sessions. Every step felt like a battle, but Ava refused to let it defeat her. Her mother noticed the strain and tried to intervene. Ava, you're pushing too hard, Marlene said one evening, her voice filled with concern. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Yes, I do, Ava replied, her voice cracking. I have to prove it to myself. As the competition loomed, Ava felt the pressure mounting. The whispers in her head, you're not good enough. You don't belong to, grew louder with each passing day. But she also felt something else, the fire that refused to be extinguished. The night before the competition, Ava stood alone in the studio, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The crack down the side seemed to mock her, splitting her image in two. On one side was the girl who doubted, who struggled, who had every reason to give up. On the other was the woman she was fighting to become. I'm not done, Ava whispered to herself. She began her routine, moving slowly at first, testing her limits. As the music swelled, so did her confidence. Pain shot through her ankle with every jump, but she pushed through, letting the music drown out everything else. By the time she finished, she was breathless, her body screaming in protest. But for the first time in weeks, Ava smiled. She wasn't broken, she was ready. The day of the competition arrived with a chill in the air. Ava stood backstage at the Grand Theater, her heart pounding like a drum. The space buzzed with nervous energy, dancers warming up, instructors whispering last-minute advice, the muffled sound of the audience filling the seats beyond the heavy curtains. Ava adjusted the ribbon on her pristine ballet slippers, the only pair she could afford after weeks of saving tips from her part-time job. They weren't as new or flawless as the ones other dancers wore, but they were hers, a testament to her struggle and determination. Competitor 16, "You're up in 3, a stagehand called, glancing at Ava. Her stomach flipped, but she forced herself to stand tall. She had spent months preparing for this moment. And despite the lingering pain in her ankle, she wasn't going to let fear win. Nearby, Ava caught sight of Olivia, who was also competing. Olivia's confidence radiated as she adjusted her sparkling costume. She shot Ava a smug glance. "Good luck," Olivia said, her tone insincere. "You'll need it." Ava didn't reply. Instead, she closed her eyes, blocking out the noise, the stares, and the weight of expectations. She focused on her breathing, grounding herself. The announcer's voice boomed through the theater, and now, competitor number 16, Ava Monroe. The applause was polite but subdued, a stark contrast to the cheers that had greeted other dancers. Ava felt the sting but brushed it aside. This wasn't about them. She stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding her for a moment. As the music began, Ava took a deep breath and let the melody guide her. Her movements were fluid, each step precise yet full of emotion. Every leap, turn, and extension told a story of resilience, of fighting against odds, of refusing to give up. Halfway through her routine, Ava's ankle screamed in protest. The pain was sharp, nearly crippling. She faltered slightly, her balance wavering. A gasp rippled through the audience. In that split second, time seemed to slow. Ava's mind raced. Do I stop? Do I let this beat me? Then she remembered her mother's voice. Want it bad enough. Ava, gritting her teeth, Ava pushed through the pain. Her next leap was higher, her spins faster. The fire inside her blazed brighter, driving her forward. By the time she struck her final pose, the stage was silent. For a moment, Ava thought she had failed. But then, the applause began, soft at first, then building into a thunderous ovation. Ava's chest heaved as she caught her breath, her body aching but her spirit soaring. She glanced into the crowd and saw her mother standing, clapping with tears streaming down her face. Backstage, the other competitors murmured among themselves. Even Olivia couldn't hide her begrudging admiration. As the judges deliberated, Ava waited nervously, her hands trembling. When the results were announced, her heart nearly stopped. The winner of this year's International Ballet Competition is Ava Monroe. Tears welled in Ava's eyes as the crowd erupted into cheers. She stepped forward to accept her trophy, the weight of it almost surreal. This wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for every girl who had been told she didn't belong, for every person who had faced obstacles and pushed through. As Ava left the stage, clutching her trophy, she saw Olivia watching her, a mix of respect and resentment on her face. Ava didn't need to say anything. Her performance had spoken louder than words ever could. In that moment, Ava knew she had proven them all wrong. The days following Ava's victory felt like a whirlwind. News of her win spread quickly, with social media buzzing about the trailblazing dancer who had defied all odds. Articles and interviews described her performance as mesmerizing, soulful, and a triumph over adversity. But the most impactful messages came from young dancers around the world. Ava's inbox overflowed with emails and DMs from girls who looked like her, who had struggled like her, and who now felt inspired to keep chasing their dreams. One message stood out: "Dear Ava, I watched your performance online, and I cried the whole time. You made me feel like I belong. Thank you for showing me that we can rise." Love, Nia, a future ballerina. Ava wiped away tears as she read it. It wasn't just about her journey anymore. It was about paving the way for others. The win also brought opportunities Ava had only dreamed of. Prestigious ballet companies reached out, offering contracts and solo roles. She chose carefully, aligning herself with organizations that valued diversity and inclusivity, but Ava didn't forget where she came from. She used her newfound platform to advocate for change in the ballet world. She held workshops for underprivileged kids, ensuring they had access to the resources and mentorship she had struggled to find. One day, as Ava stood in the very studio where she had once been relegated to the back row, she noticed a group of young dancers practicing. They were a mix of ethnicities, their passion evident in every move. "Excuse me, Miss Monroe," one of the girls said shyly. "Could you show us how to do that leap you did in the competition?" Ava smiled warmly. "Of course. But remember, it's not just about the leap. It's about believing you can soar." As she demonstrated, her mind flashed back to all the hurdles she had faced, the whispers, the sabotage, the pain. But those moments didn't define her. What defined her was the fire that had refused to be extinguished. That evening, Ava sat with her mother on their modest balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance. "You did it, baby," Marlene said, her voice filled with pride. "We did it," Ava replied, squeezing her mother's hand. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter that night, as if celebrating Ava's journey. She had risen from the shadows to claim her place in the spotlight, not just as a dancer but as a symbol of resilience and hope. If Ava's story moved you, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Like this video, leave a comment, and let us know what part of her journey inspired you the most. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Together, we can celebrate resilience, break barriers, and inspire change.